Yes, I think the biggest obstacle, most people would agree on the SDGs. I don't think there's any disagreement on that. But in terms of achieving them, I think achieving biodiversity, gains in biodiversity we're not achieving our targets in biodiversity. And I think in terms of just general concern for environmental quality across the planet is a major concern. And the sustainable use of endowment of natural resources remains a huge challenge. And I think in a way, I'm an economist, right? And so my response to much of that has to do with the design of markets and mechanisms, the institutions that we use to achieve our sustainable development goals. And I think that's probably where a lot of the action has to happen in that particular space. I think New Zealand it has an open market, it has a democratic system of government. The thing that New Zealand can offer when it comes, and this relates to your earlier question too, the thing that New Zealand can offer is the experiences that New Zealand has had and is having over issues such as tackling climate change, tackling biodiversity, and so on. And so I think probably that's one of the major contributions that we can make. The top issues that are facing New Zealand and the South Pacific countries have to do, well, there's climate change, I think, and extreme climate events. So we in New Zealand, we have had experience with cyclones, which had a devastating impact on communities in New Zealand. So those extreme weather events are very important going forward, but they actually extend beyond that because with changing weather patterns, for example, we're in agriculture, our agriculture is very important in our economy. So if we get increased droughts, our agricultural production is impacted, but not only our agricultural production, but also, as I mentioned in the lecture, our lakes will not fill up with water and we have to burn fossil fuels, for example. So changing weather patterns and climate change are significant to New Zealand, and also this is also significant for the South Pacific island nations also. Biodiversity, I think I've mentioned biodiversity is an issue, maintaining biodiversity in New Zealand. This is a real challenge for New Zealanders because a lot of our ecologies are very sensitive to external events. We have or are experiencing incursions of species into our ecosystems from overseas, water-based, which has an impact on our biodiversity too. So that's a real challenge going forward. And just following on from that, I think the sustainability of our primary production systems, agriculture in particular, is significant. And I believe that New Zealand agriculture is going to have to adapt and adjust to climate variations in the future, more sustainable systems of production. If I look at the comparative advantage of China and New Zealand producers are quite innovative in terms of green growth and more green systems of production. I think a particular area that China could contribute to would be in the development of information technologies, for example, that I guess facilitate the utilization of natural resources in a low impact way. The one thing that New Zealand doesn't manufacture materials, equipment, things like that. We have a relatively high level of education in New Zealand, and we have innovative farmers and producers. But I think access to smart technology and building those systems in New Zealand would be, in a cooperative way, would be a really win-win situation for not only New Zealand, but hopefully for China. I think the only possible evidence that I can offer is the learnings and the lessons that we have enjoyed, benefited from in New Zealand that can be shared with other economies. That's really, well, well, I don't know, it's up to host countries to decide whether that's a great thing or not. I think that's where it comes down to exchanges, research, connections between New Zealand institutions and universities such as University of Peking can actually exchange and do collaborative kind of research that we both learn from each other, because you can think of, and I'm going to start on a favourite topic of mine, is that you can think of reforms, different policies as experiments. Right? And so New Zealand in the 1980s transitioned from a command and control economy in the mid-1980s to a pretty much a market-based economy. Now, learning from that experience there, I think, is something that other countries could perhaps look at and say, maybe they did this the wrong way, or maybe we could do it another way, or maybe they did it the right way, that sort of thing, you know. And so having those exchanges, I think, is really important. So you could think of New Zealand as, in some ways, as a laboratory where we run experiments. And so currently our experience with the emissions trading scheme, all right, so what kind of learnings, what kind of benefits do you in China, for example, or anywhere else, get from that experience? And I think that's something that comes out of relationships between universities and institutions. I think infrastructure is obviously very, very important. But I mean, if we think beyond that, thinking about the resilience, building economies that are resilient to adverse events, you know, and obviously in the Pacific, but I don't know anything much about Africa, so I'm ignorant on that. Particularly in the Pacific, South Pacific, building those communities so that they are resilient to external events. And that can be typhoons, could be cyclones, could be pandemics, all sorts of things. And so those communities are resilient. But so that would involve obviously built things like roads and stuff like that. That's important too. But also I think there's a soft side to that in terms of the smarter technologies that are available. So these economies, some of these economies have got massive exclusive economic zones, huge areas, hundreds of thousands of square kilometres areas. And so the question then is, well, how might those economies utilise, protect, manage those massive land, those massive water areas there in a way that benefits not only them but the global community? So that's going to involve technologies, it's going to involve smart technologies, it's going to involve remote sensing, all those sorts of things that are available. So enabling those smaller economies and maybe the larger economies and developing those technologies, I think is really important. So it's not only just building roads and walls and that sort of stuff, it's also, and then there's capacity building too. And so, you know, actually investing, I think this is very important, investing in the human capital of these countries in the south, so that those people can figure out what's best for them and develop according to their own culture. So if you look at the global south, you've got a diverse range of cultures. And so, you know, cultures are really, really important in terms of moving forward. So the culture in New Zealand, we've got Indigenous Māori in New Zealand. They are really critically important to, and you think of it in economic terms, not only in economic terms, but in cultural terms. So preserving those cultures, building the institutions that recognise those cultures, and they're going to differ across the global south. So those are the sorts of things that I think that can be addressed through cooperation. So it's not only just coming in and say, well, I'm going to build you a new motorway. I think it's more than that. It's more than that. It has to involve the local people, their cultures, and so on. I think my message is for the youth, because it's your future, it's not mine, it's your future, and I think involving young minds and young energies and the young spirit of youth in moving forward, I think, is critical. And so I'm here, I'm an old man, and I'm happy to support young people achieve their goals and their desires going forward. So I wish you all the very best.